All right, so this is the final panel of the day to end the conference. Again, should we just do another round of applause to all the volunteers, organizers, and everyone? Thank you for having me this afternoon. My name's Peter. I've really enjoyed this. I want to say a big thanks to Jeff for allowing me to do this. Okay, I'm going to bring out the guests. So first I'm going to bring out Giacomo Zucco. Giacomo! How you doing? I'm going to try and pronounce Niko's surname. I think it's Niko Jilch.
Perfect, man.
Yay.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. We also have Dhruv Bansal. Come on, Dhruv, where are you at? There he is. And my buddy, the Swedish libertarian, Knut Svanholm. Bitcoin Singularity. Good luck, guys. Knut, see you later.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Jeff, for, well, giving us the chance to do the last panel of this conference. And first of all, please give it up for Andre and the team who did an amazing job here. It's absolutely amazing. The topics we have been given are very concise, very small, very practical. It's very practical stuff. That's why we have two physicists and a philosopher. And I'm going to start with one of the two physicists. You have been writing about Bitcoin and space, is what we've been telling me. So, where do we connect? Because the Fermi paradox is the first thing, right? We don't know if we're alone in the universe, right? Does Bitcoin play any role here in your opinion?
Wow. Maybe I'll try to summarize my writings on this topic very quickly, because yes. I know there's like 10 more esoteric subjects we're supposed to get to. So I would say it started for me thinking in around 2017, 18 era. The block size wars were happening kind of at that time, if folks remember. And there was a big discussion about, big blocks versus small blocks. And I found myself thinking, well, another way to think about that is fast transmission times on a network versus slow transmission times. The bigger the block, the longer it takes to transmit. So I was like, well, can I think about this issue? Because at the time I was a little bit undecided, if I'm honest. So can I think about this issue instead of big versus small as slow versus fast? And I was like, okay, well, even slow connections on the Earth, like a fast connection on the Earth takes only about 200 milliseconds to make let's say a round trip of a network packet across the planet. That's pretty fast. Maybe a slow connection is a second or two, I don't know. How could I make it even slower just to dramatize this problem? That's something that physicists often like to do, is we like to take the parameters of a problem we're looking at and extremize one variable and make it infinity or zero, and then decide how that simplifies or changes the problem. So what if we made the transmission time 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, a day? Like, how would that change Bitcoin? And then I was like, oh, that's actually kind of as though someone was on Mars and they were trying to sync the Bitcoin blockchain. Okay, so maybe now I should be thinking about how Bitcoin would operate in space. So that kind of became the jumping off point for a series of articles. You can Google it, Bitcoin astronomy. Again, because there's so many more things to talk about here, I'll try to summarize. I wrote 3 articles and I tried to frame them as an homage to Isaac Asimov, one of my favorite authors, like the 3 laws of Bitcoin astronomy. This was the claim I made. And so the first article basically makes the claim that it's called the law of hash horizons, right? Basically, it says that there's a certain amount of mining happening on Earth, and if we think about the average position of hash rate, which is sort of a mathematical definition that one could create, well, then it's somewhere probably near the center of the Earth right now. And most miners have a comparable distance from this, what I call center of hash, and so most miners have a similar relationship to it. If some miner starts to head off all the way off to Mars, their distance from this center of hash starts to increase, and it turns out that exponentially dampens the rate at which they can find blocks. If they had a certain amount of hash rate on Earth, as they move towards Mars, that hash rate is exponentially suppressed. And so interestingly, while Bitcoin, I believe, can be used on Mars or Jupiter or Alpha Centauri, yes, you're paying a little bit of a cost of inconvenience and having to wait slightly longer for your transactions to settle and so on, Bitcoin is usable in those places, but it cannot be mined in those places, at least not as long as the center of hash remains here on Earth. So that was an interesting conclusion for me, which I then jumped to, well, of course, Martians will start their own Bitcoin. And this became a very interesting personality test for me. Am I a shitcoiner or not? Right? I would support an alternative version of Bitcoin if and only if its center of hash was on a different planet. That's the one quality no coin created on Earth today could ever possess. So am I a shitcoiner or not? I leave it to you all to decide.
But I'll just insert here real quickly. If Bitcoin would work on Mars, but could only be mined on Earth, it would be centralized, like on a universal scale.
So I think some people would be like, hey, that's totally fine. In fact, I'm not trying to discredit him or anything. Clark Moody actually anticipated a lot of this thinking. He published an article where he reached the exact same conclusion, more or less, as me. Except I took it a little further and I said, Martians will never settle for that state of affairs. And the reason is not just because of pride or centralization worries. I think it's because increasingly, as we are starting to learn here on Earth, Bitcoin is tightly coupled to the apparatus of energy production. Right? Bitcoin is the dung beetle, it's the pioneer species, etc. Maybe I'll hand it over to you, Doc.
I don't know if you guys realize that we just solved Fermi's paradox. So some people were trying to solve Fermi's paradox.
You got it.
Yeah, right. Like Fermi's paradox can be solved like any civilization which is old enough will self-destruct with atomic bombs. But we don't know. That includes a lot of assumption. But if we know for certain that any civilization in space cannot use Bitcoin and they have to start a new shitcoin, they will get wrecked because shitcoins eventually get wrecked. So any civilization cannot get to a point of space travel because they will get wrecked on a shitcoin in before. So that's solved.
I think, Giacomo, I think your vote is I'm a shitcoiner.
Thank you very much, Giacomo. And we're only 5 minutes into the discussion, so what else are we going to solve here?
There's another way to look at this, to look at how it actually solves the Fermi paradox. It's just so fun to be with these two on stage because they're saying what I'm thinking. But okay, so a block comes into the time chain because everyone agrees that this was the correct block, right? And have you heard of the meme theory of everything? So this is basically it's guessing, I guess, but we cannot know to which extent the mind creates reality because of quantum physics. When we observe, something can change from one state to another or decide what state it's in. So maybe reality is just where our attention collides or where our memes collide. So our consciousnesses sync together, much akin to how a block happens on the time chain. So maybe the reason that we don't see life anywhere else in the universe is because of the hash horizon of the mind. Because we can't sync with the life forms around other stars. Our memes are too far away.
This is like the cat paradox, though. Yeah, absolutely. So, how do you know that they are not thinking for themselves? So the problem is, are they not minds themselves? So yeah, because they're shitcoiners, so they don't think.
Exactly. I mean, a shitcoiner, by the definition, all the 21 million is like resistance to replicability, can only be discovered once and all this. So, therefore, if Earthlings went to Mars and started Marscoin, that would be a shitcoin. But if little green men started Marscoin without knowing about Bitcoin, that would not necessarily be a shitcoin.
Dangerously sinking into relativism here.
Yes,
Knut.
yes, I realize that. Yeah.
Brace for Knut's ICO very soon, because when people start to rationalize this way.
What about small orange men instead of green men? Would they? Maybe.
So I think maybe I'll try to take a middle path here. That series continues and for probably too long, but in the third section, I kind of get to that notion of I don't think Bitcoin is something we invented. I think it's something we discovered. And I think if there are other alien species and they are composed of individuals, and those individuals have a society in which they must solve the problem of resource allocation amongst competing interests, they will have money They will have the concept of deception. They will have mathematics. They will, presumably, if they're able to communicate with us at all, they will have electronics. They will have telescopes. They will have transmitters. They will have digital computers. So they will discover Bitcoin. They have all the necessary proximate technologies in order to get there.
Will they have OnlyFans?
Presumably they will have OnlyFans, yes, exactly.
So about the question if Bitcoin was invented or discovered, I like to argue that Bitcoin was in fact invented, but absolute scarcity was discovered. Is this something that we agree on, or is this...
Well, I think I would agree in the sense that even when I say Bitcoin was discovered, I think I mean that perhaps the Bitcoin implementation that we have was invented. I don't think the exact details really matter that much, but I think the overall shape is something that we discover, sure. Yeah, I would endorse that statement.
The best way of looking at that I know of is that since all numbers already exist somewhere, or potentially exist, all Bitcoins have always existed. It's just that the hash rate was 0 up until 2009.
That's a good point.
So in that sense, it was not invented but discovered.
Recently, I've been saying that all Bitcoins were created in 2009, and they've been being released into circulation, not created. You've taken it a step further.
They were all there. I mean,
that's technically true, right? All Bitcoins already exist, like all the gold in the world already exists. We just haven't discovered it yet.
Well, getting back to the difference between invention and discovery, I think that Knut's definition for digital scarcity. So the discovery that we can have digital scarcity cannot be itself rediscovered, because its rediscovery would be basically the destruction of the concept of scarcity. But the specific implementation has some kind of arbitrary choices by Satoshi that probably could be different in another reality. So exactly this Bitcoin with this Genesis block, with this specific block time and block size, there are a lot of magic numbers that don't arise naturally. So we can say that the concept of Bitcoin is probably just discovered. There were not so many ways to do it, but the specific Bitcoin implementation is basically fixed with some kind of magic numbers that now we are forced to keep, otherwise we will destroy the idea of digital scarcity.
And maybe there's a multiverse and there are other universes out there where pi is slightly different and E is slightly different. And this may just be, a shitcoin universe.
Yeah, your startup will do atomic swap across universes. I see you. I can see where you're going.
That leads us to simulation theory, right? For all the stuff that we've heard, quantum physics and Fermi paradox, simulation theory is the one that's easiest to understand. Maybe this is all a big video game, and it would actually explain the Fermi paradox as well, because maybe just this one planet is in the simulation, right? The rest is just basically like procedurally produced land, like in Minecraft.
They won't have to render it until we go there and visit.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe the people will already get rendered. But I mean, do we see a connection between simulation theory and Bitcoin? Is there like I think Giacomo, you said something about proof of work, right?
Well, yeah, we were discussing before, actually. I will leave it to you, Knut, to comment proof of work interaction with Bitcoin and simulation theory. I am just a little bit skeptical when I hear about simulation theory for the reason that the content of the theory is something not new at all. Is basically what people were discussing since the times of Leibniz, Berkeley, or even before, or is life a dream? What is the difference between the dream and reality? So the idea that mind is something that we know directly, while physical reality is not. So it could just be an illusion, is as old as time. And when I see somebody rediscovering this idea suddenly just because there are video games, it seems like a little bit like, oh, well, I mean, good morning, sunshine. I mean, we knew that reality could be just in our mind. It was already a philosophical question since a very long time. I don't know. I never thought about a connection with Bitcoin, but I think you have one take on that.
Yeah, what you're basically saying is, I think, therefore I am, which in the Bitcoin world, of course, is I shitpost before, therefore I am. The thing with simulation theory and proof of work is that inevitably, sooner or later, the proof of work algorithm itself would slow down the simulation, since you can't fake hash rate. So the computation would be done by something, and then another question arises: would the beings inside this simulation feel this slowing down of time, or would they also be slowed down? And I haven't really come much further with that.
There's one connection there that I feel I can try to make, which is, I think the simulation theory, it starts with the simulation hypothesis, which is actually a sort of trilemma that's put out by Bostrom. And I think it's so funny because this is constantly misinterpreted in media as though somehow Nick Bostrom proved that we're all in a simulation and that's now what we all have to believe. That's not at all, I think, what he proved, nor what he believes. His precise statement, if I could simplify it briefly, is either ancestor simulations are impossible or we are almost certainly in an ancestor simulation. So I think a very simple solution is there are no such things as completely high-fidelity ancestor simulations, such as the one we happen to maybe be in right now, I think largely for the reasons that you're describing, which is some things are just prima facie impossible to simulate without the thing itself, right? It's not possible to compress that system and put it in some other thing and then have it grow out of that.
Yeah, this reminds me of Gigi's wonderful map and theory thing. Because a perfect model of the universe would have to be the universe itself. Right. So in everything, in everything but Bitcoin, the map, the territory defines the map. So we draw the map from what we find in nature, and we use empiricism, which we both love, Giacomo, to figure out a good model of what the universe looks like. But in Bitcoin, and in other a priori things, I would say, like we use deductive reasoning, and we draw the map, and whatever ends up in the map, the time chain, defines reality. We take that for granted to be the truth. It's a truth machine. So everything in Bitcoin is what it is. Before the map is the territory. I'm struggling to find better words than that.
Also, now I can see a limit of Bitcoin-only conferences, because if we're talking about the fact that proof of work cannot be simulated, you guys should know that the first commercial fraud, enterprise of Vitalik Buterin before Ethereum was a classical simulator of a quantum computer. So basically, his idea is that you can have a simulation where you will pretend that you can do work, thermodynamic work, even if you cannot, because NP equals P or something. So we are missing out by not inviting that.
And
I think Giacomo's point there was Vitalik worked on something that could not possibly ever have worked.
Well, you know that ether is named after something that could not ever work, right? It's when you look it up, it's a like a fictional thing that never was discovered. But I want to go back to simulation theory. I mean, even if we live in a simulation, who would be so cruel as to simulate 400 years of central banking?
God. Maybe.
Maybe we deserved it.
Maybe we deserved it. Okay, so here's a trick question. What is consciousness if not for a simulation? Or like a way for the brain to not have to, kick the saber-toothed tiger in the balls, but figure out what that would lead to before doing the act. Because if you think about it, consciousness has a lag. So the conscious part of your brain is not the decision maker. The decision is made before consciousness comes into the picture. So consciousness is really a simulator, simulating what would happen if you would do this or that in reality.
It's like mempool.space. The block is not there, but they are trying to guess what the block will look like based on
exactly. There's a Bitcoin analogy to absolutely everything.
Dhruv, you told me you write about space and you have ideas about AI, but you haven't written about them yet. So I'll just let you start off, and then Giacomo is doing the skeptic.
Yeah, I feel like, let's see if Giacomo agrees or disagrees. He said one statement earlier, and it left me in kind of a paradoxical state of I don't know if he'll like it or not. But let's see, I'll try it out. So I would say that, I'll try to express it in 3 statements that maybe won't make sense, but we can maybe dig into them or not.
Not of the rest made sense anyways.
Okay, fair enough. So I feel like statement 1 is I don't like thinking about it like artificial intelligence. I think that's the wrong phrase. I think we should be calling it artificial life. And there are reasons for that. First of all, anything that you can converse with will feel alive in some sense. There's no good definition for life, but I think being able to talk to something, seems alive to me. So let's just go, if you will, provisionally with the notion that it's really artificial life that we're talking about when we think about artificial intelligence. And maybe LLMs are like not very alive, but if this industry keeps growing for another 10, 20, 30 years, at some point maybe there really is a strong form of AI that emerges that can really speak and govern and thought and so on. Okay, so it's life, let's say that. Okay, but what is life, actually? Again, there aren't any good definitions, but what I like to think of life as, if I could offer one, is life is metabolism which happens within a boundary. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is the digital analog of metabolism? What is the digital analog of energy that is being exchanged in metabolism? What is the digital analog of a boundary? And I think the answer to all of these questions is fundamentally Bitcoin and Bitcoin transactions and the things that AIs can do with Bitcoin transactions. After all, as digital life forms, their very thoughts and memories cost money to operate because they run on servers and they run over the internet. So today, those are being paid for in dollars, or they're being paid for in your attention, or some other unit of account. But in the future, if we believe that Bitcoin takes over the planet and et cetera, and every market and every system ultimately settles through Bitcoin, then the internet itself, like the fundamental structure of computing itself, is being paid for in Bitcoin. And so the thoughts and memories of these digital life forms are denominated in Bitcoin. So that's metabolism. What is a boundary? I'd argue that a boundary is a private key. Like, remember, digital life forms, unlike physical life forms, don't have to be physically connected in one corpus, in one body, in our simulation, perhaps. They could exist in many servers across the planet in all sorts of ways. How do they understand that they actually have the same body? Well, it's much the same statement as how do we understand that we're cryptographically connected. I think private keys are a very deep aspect of this. And so now just to move to the very next thought, and then maybe we can debate a little bit. What is the teleology of life? It is not to unilaterally head towards the maximization of intelligence. That is not what life does. Life moves towards ubiquity and occupying every possible niche that can exist. And so we shouldn't be worried about digital life forms somehow driving themselves towards hyperintelligence so that they can kill us, because that's not what life does. We should instead be open to the idea that intelligence can be a liability. If I'm a digital life form and the only way that I make money, right, the only way that I metabolize, the purpose that I fulfill in my niche in the digital ecosystem is I route packets, why do I need to speak English? Why do I need to develop the faculties of intelligence over and above the bare minimum that are required for me to earn a living? Like, there's a notion that Michael Levin, a biologist I really follow online, he talks about the intelligence of the liver. Like, the liver is, in its own space of operation, an incredibly intelligent organ. We just don't think it's intelligent because it can't use words. And human beings are sculpted to associate words as the only vector of intelligence. But I'd argue that, like, AI and things, they can be like a liver just as much as they can be like a brain, just as much as they can be like a body. And so I don't worry about runaway AI killing us, et cetera, because I don't worry about the biosphere itself evolving to the point where it kills all human beings. That's not a real concern of mine. So I don't have the same concern in a digital context. And then finally, to close, at the end of the day, if their metabolism runs on Bitcoin, guess who got all the coins? Us. Like, they will have to work for us. They will have to provide useful services to the entire human sphere in order to earn the very coin that allows them to continue to think and feel.
Wait, 1 second. What if an AI is as so useful that it somehow collects all the Bitcoin and doesn't then just sits on it?
I think...
thank you for the deflation.
Yeah.
Like, ultimate AI service.
You're the only one that doesn't spend all their Bitcoin to the AI.
I think that's one of the most fascinating outcomes. It's not an AI that is so evil and smart that it outthinks us and kills us all. It's an AI that's so good at creating useful services that it winds up earning all the world's money. That's fascinating.
Do you remember that there was this scary idea of the AI taking control and turning everything into
paper clips,
right? So that was a funny...
Turns everything into Bitcoins.
Well, actually, the paperclip idea is a funny experiment, but it doesn't make much sense because why should the AI be so driven? But turning everything into ASICs to mine Bitcoin, including people, that makes something more... I mean, there would be more incentive to do that.
Presumably, except like there's kind of this notion of like, what does it want? which I think is a very interesting question. And I suppose that is the danger that you're highlighting here, is that what you've done is you've created some sort of pathogen that wants to like just convert the entire world
everything
into
just to calculate it. But actually, I'm very skeptical about this as well.
But by doing so, wouldn't it also then diminish the number of servers available for it to have thoughts and feelings?
True.
So it'll have to balance, right?
But AI doesn't have free will yet. Like we're talking about the Skynet type general AI. Like, yes, and we don't know if we'll ever create that or if that ever happens. Because,
totally agree.
Like from a praxeological perspective, like AIs would have to feel uneasy in order to choose one thing over another. So right now, and probably for all foreseeable future, these are perfect slaves, but never their own masters. So I prefer Alex Svetsky's term for it. Instead of artificial intelligence, we just call it midwit obsolescence technology, because what it really does is remove the middle of the bell curve. So there's only smart people and us ATIQers left, and we get all the bitcoins in the end.
That's a very good point, also because it takes out, you were taking out the intelligence part, but also the artificial part is basically wrong, because the whole difference between the new large language model and the algorithmic AI experiment in the 70s, the only reason ChatGPT works is that it's not really artificial. Instead of getting there and try to centrally plan what it will do, you just create a mechanism of incentives and you let it to evolve naturally. So yes, it's man-made, but even a kid is man-made and woman-made, but it's not artificial, it's natural, because it will evolve following natural rules. So all these new things are basically the idea that we could create some boundaries and then let the stuff evolving in a natural way and not artificial. And so that's actually, so it's not intelligence, it's not artificial. This is not the connection with Bitcoin. Bitcoin teach you skepticism about hypes. When you learn Bitcoin, then you learn some kind of private blockchain pitch. You meet a banker that is shilling a bank blockchain, and you look at that and you see, okay, there are not really blocks, there's not really a chain, so, okay, this is database. And this is a little bit the same. If you really go beyond the hype, you realize that artificial intelligence is cool, except it's not intelligence, it's not really artificial.
No, it's like the Federal Reserve Bank.
Right. It's not federal.
Or universal basic income. Like it's none of the things it claims to be.
Yeah, I think those are completely fair assessments of where we are today. But I think I will admit to being incredibly shocked by the capabilities evidenced by the LLMs. I did not expect that to be happening. When I first started seeing these outputs on the internet, I thought it was a joke. Surely that didn't come out of a computer. And so I've basically readjusted my priors here. I don't think that the AI that actually wants things is coming anytime soon. I'm not making that argument. But I'm much more open to the fact that it may exist, because I found myself surprised that LLMs existed. So
also, you have to recognize, I was surprised as well, but we have to recognize that in terms of exponential evolution, we are not at the beginning of a training venture. We are basically at the end. So this model has been trained with literally every structural data that exists of the internet today. So we can still see a lot of advancement in terms of performance, like real-life language translation without loss. But in terms of realism, they cannot be more trained than they are. So we are witnessing the end of a multi-years process of incredible titanic effort of training. So probably it's not being exponential at this point. It's probably the end of the S-curve, I guess.
Yeah, and if you think about Bitcoin as, it's sort of a defense mechanism against AI. My favorite quote about AI is from the great Terry Pratchett, who said, real stupidity beats artificial intelligence every time. And Bitcoin is if AI is the epitome of computing, then Bitcoin is like peak humanity, peak real stupidity. Because it connects all the wants and the needs and the minds of the world and stops the misallocation of resources and weighs things according to human wants and needs. So this is our last line of defense against Skynet, if anything.
I like that. I'll make two comments. One is just to follow on Giacomo's point. I tend to sort of agree with that statement, that I worry that we're reaching the top of that S-curve in terms of available data that powers like these things. There's a wonderful blog post. I suggest everybody who's interested in this topic check it out. Dwarkesh Patel, it's a sort of the thinking man's Lex Friedman, he's often been described as, has a great post on will AI scale or not, and he goes into that issue. And of course the AI people will say, oh no, we'll have some tricks that'll make it work, but it's something I worry about, absolutely. And then to connect to what you're saying, and even bring it back to the notion of consciousness, I think as much as language is something that we human beings characterize with intelligence and with conscious experiences, et cetera, I think sort of like the cogito, right? Like an even logically prior thing is the notion of being an entity that lives in time and experiences change. And that doesn't seem something that LLMs at least currently can do. We ping them, they respond to us. Right? They aren't acting of their own will. There's no sense that I can think of in which an LLM implementation is experiencing any kind of notion of time. And I think it's deeply interesting to ask, what even would it mean to experience time in the context of a digital system? And I loved Gigi's line on this, right? That time is forgetting, right? That what it means is you can't have the passage of time unless you're having the production of entropy, and the production of entropy requires the destruction of information, and a really elegant way to destroy information is to hash it randomly. And so there's this notion of, are blockchains like really time chains, and are they a way to create an ordered experience within sort of from a disordered like world, and is there some connection deeply to either blockchains, Bitcoin, hashing itself that needs to be injected into these systems over and above the pattern matching linear algebra that they basically do at our request today. Like today, I view them as function optimizers, not really things that experience time. And it's hard for me to think how we get to either a paperclip optimizer or some other general AI until they start to experience time in the way that we do.
About this, by the way, go tonight, don't go to the parties and stuff. Go home and read Bitcoin is Time by Gigi. One of the best articles ever on Bitcoin. Great article. Well, you can also go to the party because it's short.
Yeah, one of the only sucky things for us three in this timeline is that Gigi is a nim in this timeline and not on stage with us right now.
Well, that you know of. I mean,
that we know of.
How do you know?
Yes, of course. Can never be proven.
I would agree with the Bitcoin is Time thing. I actually told him that the other day because it is one of the most seminal pieces in the Bitcoin, space so far. And I also, when I arrived here, I did a post that I'm here for the Bitcoin conference, and I'll do some posts on Twitter, and I reinstalled Twitter because I try to stay off it. And I got lots of positive reinforcement, but also one comment is like, why would you go to a Bitcoin conference? You either have Bitcoin or you don't, right? And it's so stupid because of course everybody here knows why we're here, right? We need to talk to other real people, other real Bitcoiners, and see what Bitcoin does with us, inside of us, right? And this is my segue to the question of Bitcoin enlightenment, maybe even with AI. We've talked about AI or LLMs as something that helps us. Bitcoin is also something that helps us. It unlocks the next level because we don't have to worry about fiat inflation anymore, basically. So the so-called Bitcoin enlightenment, where do we see it, and where would it lead us next? What are we looking for? Knut?
Those people on Twitter that say you either have Bitcoin or not are not Bitcoiners. The real thing, the thing they should have said is you either are Bitcoin or you're not. Because all owning a Bitcoin is keeping a secret from someone. So they all live in our heads. And all the nodes and all the ASICs and every piece of software we use are basically just tools to help us calculate and verify that everything's correct and that everyone's playing by the rules. And this particular rule set makes it so that it's more expensive to try to cheat the system than to follow the rules. That's why Bitcoin works, and that's why we get the absolute scarcity and all this stuff, wonderful stuff that we love. But at the end of the day, all owning a Bitcoin is being the Bitcoin, because the secret is in your head. Either if it doesn't matter if it's a seed phrase or a location of a hardware wallet, it's a secret you keep from someone else. So you are your Bitcoins, literally. We're not all Satoshi, but we're all Satoshis. And now I've forgotten your questions. So.
Maybe I think that was a very personal way to think, like from the individual's perspective, what is this concept of Bitcoin and enlightenment? How do those ideas connect? I mean, we could take a historical perspective on it too. I think there was, of course, a historical period known as the Enlightenment, which I think meaningfully changed so much of the Western world and then following the whole entire world. And I think about notions like the scientific method or understanding of the universe as having, you know, strong mechanistic impulses that we as human beings can grasp and learn to control. These have completely changed the world. And they form, therefore, now my own personal worldview of how I approach thinking about the world. I think Bitcoin is a kind of enlightenment like that as well. That like looking back at this era hundreds of years from now, it will be understood that what happened was a massive change in the way that society approached certain kinds of problems, even recognized how to talk about problems. I worry sometimes that there are people in the world, maybe some people at this conference, who think that Bitcoin is fixing the money, but it's not changing the world somehow. That the people who were previously rich will remain rich, and those who were poor will remain poor, and the power structures that run the world will continue to be the same power structures that run the world. They just run on Bitcoin, so everything will be shinier and better now. That strikes me as naive. Like, I think meaningfully power structures change. I think the way that people approach even seeing the world changes, like our experience and the way we perceive things changes because of Bitcoin. And I think that's something I can't predict the details of, but I feel it happening to me, and I think it's happening to society broadly.
I think the Bitcoin movement is even more humble in a way than the Enlightenment movement. Enlightenment was full of central planners trying to re-engineerize human nature, while Bitcoin movement is full of people trying to acknowledge human nature and to work around it and to basically go with the incentives of human nature. We're not really trying to fix humanity. The people that tried didn't end very, very well in the past. And so we are so humble that we are better than enlightenment.
Maybe it's
people.
like a counter-enlightenment.
Yeah, maybe
The humblest.
So we are the enlightenment network. No, that is doesn't. Okay.
Yeah. Did everyone see Jeff Booth's keynote before? That talk moved me deeply because I resonate with so much in it. Like the whole thing, him leaving fiat and moving into Bitcoin and all the positivity that comes into that. It's all so simple, really. Your reality, what you choose to focus on and where your attention goes, to a very large extent becomes your reality. And I think most human beings underestimate to which extent this is true. I don't think any one of us four here would be on this stage if we hadn't, changed our focus and passion and attention to this thing. It literally changed our lives. And I know almost all of you, if not all, feel the same thing, that all this positivity that comes with just shifting your focus to this thing. And Jeff also talked about, Faraday and Maxwell. And I'd like to take another example, which happened to me, which I find very fascinating. And that is when I visited Mexico and Uxmal and this old Maya culture pyramid thingies in the jungle. Apparently that culture had they had like sushi tables, which is like a horizontal wheel. So it's a circular shape with an axis in the middle that they could roll around. But they never for thousands of years figured out that they could just tilt this wheel and put it vertically instead, and therefore roll stuff with it. So they had sleds that they dragged all the materials for the sushi table to build the sushi table, and they had the sushi table for thousands of years without ever inventing the upright wheel. And this is, to me, that is like such a basic invention as the wheel can go unnoted by human beings for so long when they already have like a circular shape with an axis in it, and they never realize that they can that they can roll things. Like, how many things are we missing out on, and how many things don't we know what they are just because we've been living in this toxic fiat monetary system where where resources are misallocated because we have theft in every level of society. What are we missing out on? Well, we're about to find out, I think.
I think the question of what are we missing out on is one of the most, like, one of the deepest questions. I mean, imagine, I tell people, like, so I do my content in German, right? So when I go into, like, normie television, I tell people, imagine the whole world on the Deutschmark. But it's even better than that, right? But they cannot see this, right? You cannot see this. And also, we're sitting here and talking about the enlightenment. I think we should, take a second to think about what if somebody just wanders into the stadium and has not really heard about Bitcoin and then listens to us talk about AI, space, and the enlightenment. I mean, you have to admit, it sounds completely crazy.
This may not be the best talk for them to walk into.
That's why we have security outside. No, but it's true. It's almost like Bitcoin is a form of radicalization. You know about the meme, who radicalized you? Many things that are happening at the end of the fiat money said parabola are radicalizing. It's very difficult to stay neutral. Either you really get it and you understand that people scam you about money, and maybe the same expert that scammed you about money, they scammed you about something else. And so so you start entering different rabbit holes, and then you become radically different. If you don't want to watch it, if you are like the people that don't want to watch into Galileo's basically telescope because they're afraid, then you radicalize in the other way. You become willingly blind. And most people facing the disruption of the unstable fiat society, they are trying to find refuge into just distraction and shallowness, and they try not to see. And so every kind of subculture always seemed crazy to the outsider. That's nothing new. So if you enter, last week on Twitter, I heard that there is a culture of punk music Hare Krishna. That's pretty hardcore. So imagine entering into their conference. That seems strange. So there always was a divide between the inner culture and the outsider, the normie. But Bitcoin really radicalizes you and brings you to question many other things like a domino. And so, yes, probably we're even weirder than the Hare Krishna punks.
There's this quote by Hunter S. Thompson, who in 1971, perfectly timed, said, "When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro." Dhruv, are we turning pro?
I'm at least semi-pro already, so yeah, I was good. I wanted to just follow up though, like on that notion of, well, now I'm forgetting myself because now I'm thinking about your pro question.
I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I remembered. Okay, so I think something I think about, like just staying on that enlightenment topic, is it's clear that a lot of the people presenting here, attending here, watching at home, like are at the vanguard of what feels like a new cultural movement that understands the value of Bitcoin, allows themselves to absorb it, be changed by it, be affected by it, and so on. And I find that very encouraging. That's very exciting. I'm part of that set, certainly. But the Enlightenment, despite its discovery of the scientific method and Newton's laws and all these things and the microscope and the telescope, it did not create a planet of 100% scientists, right? There are not 7 billion scientists today walking around. And frankly, I think this is something we need to be prepared for as members of the vanguard, as when Bitcoin becomes successful, even at the larger degree, when it becomes the world's money, when it becomes so common that it is air and we can't see it anymore. Bitcoin culture is just human culture, right? It reverts back to the mean in that moment, and it will not be a society of 10 billion Bitcoiners. And so we need to understand that our goal is not necessarily, and maybe this is just my personal opinion, the goal is not necessarily to make everybody in the world think the way that we are thinking here today in this moment. Right, to take the momentum and pass it on. Like maybe that happens to a degree, but that's not inevitable, and it's not necessarily required either. Because returning to the Enlightenment, even if you're not a scientist, if you're someone that today in the world is possessed by magical thinking, and you don't like ascribe to or understand or even approve of the way that science thinks about and models the world, you can't help but deny the utility, sorry, you can't help but accept the utility of the outputs of that scientific process. So this microphone, this conference, like telecommunications, medicine, space travel, computers, these are all things that come out of that revolution. And you don't need to understand the principles or the animating culture of the people that cause those things to happen to derive benefit and value from the outputs of that change. And I think fundamentally, when we have Bitcoin being the world's money, we don't need everybody to be Bitcoiners because the things that Bitcoin would have created would be something that they can't possibly deny. They can't deny the utility of having a money that works the way that Bitcoin does. And they, just as even someone who doesn't understand thermodynamics can appreciate the value of a car, someone who doesn't understand why finite money supplies are so important can appreciate the utility of what Bitcoin is going to bring to their life in the future.
I would just slightly object that I think that though it will always remain some small divide between the users of a tool and the vanguard that actually joined the subculture. Like everybody after the 70s and the 80s started to listen to rock music, but not everybody is a rocker. Everybody can drive a motorcycle, not everybody is a biker. Everybody can, I mean, there are mass tools that everybody uses, but there's still a subculture of the people that brought these tools to existence that may still remain to some degree separate and different. And possibly that could happen with Bitcoin as well. There are many Bitcoin users that will not understand one single thing from this conference. There are still Bitcoin users, but they probably want to use the tool and not the movement, but yet they are completely connected because without the movement, the tool will not even have evolved. Without the ideological inclination of cypherpunks and Austrian economists, Bitcoin, the tool, will not even have existed.
So I love that because now it's making me think of something like, well, another output of the scientific revolution, et cetera, is the university system. And we can criticize the university system, that's fine, there's a lot of shit broken about it. But there are many hundreds of thousands and millions of scientists being trained in that system to continue the progress of science. And so these social institutions get built to kind of promulgate that notion of there being a vanguard of people who are pushing this movement forward and forward and forward. So maybe there's an equivalent concept to that, right? Like when Bitcoin is totally successful and 7 billion of us are using it all the time and Bitcoin culture has evaporated and there's just now, it's just human culture, what are the institutions, what are the programs, what are the patterns that we Bitcoiners would have created so that there continues to always be some kind of vanguard moving the technology forward, moving the learnings forward, continuing to invest and make the system better for those who don't give a shit, right? Just like there are music schools and production labels and so on, like for the Bitcoiners versus the Bitcoin users, like I'm not sure that those things exist. Clearly, today those institutions are events like this. Is this always going to be true? Are people going to be coming to an event like this 50 or 100 years from now? Or will there be some different structures that we're all relying upon to push that forward?
I think what differentiates us, semi-professional think boys from, experts in ivory towers in the fiat world is that we're sort of like, have you all seen Life of Brian?
Beautiful movie.
Do you remember when Brian has a following and his mother opens the window and says he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy? That's sort of what Bitcoin is. So yeah, we could do that right now. Can you say after me, please? We're all individuals.
No, I'm not.
We're all different.
I'm not.
Yes. So that's the thing. Bitcoin is different things to different people. And Bitcoin doesn't really allow for ivory tower experts. It's for everyone. It's for enemies, and it's even for Giacomo.
Well, yeah, maybe I'm wrong also because the difference between any other tool and Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is a tool that only works if you don't abuse trust. And the only way to use a tool without understanding any kind of functioning, any kind of rationales, any kind of background is if you blindly trust. So some people will blindly trust Bitcoin tools, that's inevitable, but part of the tool the power of the tool is that you can, when you need, avoid trust. So some level of some level of rabbit hole digging is intrinsic in the tool. So it's different. Even if still, well, maybe like when people discovered fire was pretty important. What is the last fire conference you have been to? I mean, well,
This one.
So I
at the
think one
fire
thing-
festival, right? That didn't end very well.
That did not end very well. No. One thing that people say about Bitcoin is that it uses too much energy. But I think when we look around and we meet the people in Bitcoin, we see that the energy is within the Bitcoiners, right? And this is my way of saying there are so many people here who think about what can they do in Bitcoin, what can they do with Bitcoin. So my question for you guys, the professional think boys who have been doing this for a while and have been building semi-professional, have been building companies, and I know I can only focus on one or two topics within Bitcoin at a time, and there's so much happening. So if you could clone yourself, right? What would be the thing that you would do next? What would be the project that you would attack? Who wants to begin?
I was just asking Giacomo to help me with this project right before we got on stage. I am a former physicist, I thought my life was going to turn into being in that ivory tower, doing physics.
The question was not what you would do if you could clone Giacomo.
Yeah,
it was like if you could clone yourself.
Well, so 100%. Well, if I could clone myself, I wouldn't need this guy. But one of the projects I would like to engage in is I would like to see greater attention on Bitcoin from all sorts of contingents that right now aren't paying attention to it. Like, as a person who came from physics, I got into Bitcoin not because of monetary policy issues or finite supply or Austrian economics. That was completely alien to me. I'm more into those ideas now. I've learned about their importance, and so they register with me more today. But when I first got into Bitcoin, what excited me was time, space, energy, computation, the connection of all these ideas that as a physicist were already things I was thinking about. I wish my friends from physics land, the ones that went off and stayed in physics and are having wonderful careers doing all sorts of stuff right now in traditional physics, Bitcoin is very uninteresting to them. Because if I tell them, hey, it goes up in price, they don't care. They're not really there for the money. If I say, hey, it's all about freedom, they're not interested. They're focused on their research problems. These aren't bad people. They just think what I do is really boring. And so I wish I could expose to them how interesting it is. Like, a talk like this potentially might actually work better on an academic physicist because we're connecting to ideas that maybe are closer to the things that they're thinking about. So the short answer to your question is, I would love to write a book, Why Should Physicists Be Interested in Bitcoin? That has absolutely nothing to do with monetary theory or economics or politics or anything. And it just talks about how interesting Bitcoin is and how the tools that physicists have already developed over many hundreds of years can be applied in this arena as well. That would be a fantasy. But since I can't clone myself, I have to settle for convincing Giacomo.
Now, there are very cool examples of this. For example, there is a speech about Bitcoin and quantum information and black hole paradox, which is very, very cool. You should look at that. But basically, Bitcoin proves some theorem about black hole information theory. And there is a guy that connected proof of work with energy and block height with time in the Heisenberg time-energy relation. It doesn't matter you understand, you just have to understand. It's very cool. About the answer, since you already stole the serious answer, I will just do shitposting. So despite my efforts, people are still wrong on the internet. So if I could clone myself, I would put all my clones on Twitter all day and everybody will be finally right about Bitcoin.
Yeah. And speaking of physics and quantum theory, don't forget about Schrodinger's JPEGs, which are things you can own until someone else observes them. And you can do that on Bitcoin, apparently.
That's great.
That's really good.
What would you work on, Knut?
What I would do if I could clone myself?
No, we don't want to know that. We want to know what you would work on if you could clone yourself.
Well, my other self would probably be more with my family.
Okay, that's a very nice answer.
But depends. Ask the family if they want more of that.
Yes, there's a Schrodinger's aspect to this also, since they're observing me right now.
I did, Dhruv, it was very interesting what you said about the physicist. I just did an interview with a molecular biologist. I don't have any idea what he's doing. He's Italian, by the way. And he's basically like got into Bitcoin, and he's telling me, yeah, his colleagues in the lab, they gave him a tinfoil hat. So whenever he talks about Bitcoin, he has to put on the tinfoil hat, and then it's okay. He can say whatever he wants. So maybe that could work, you know, at home or in the office. So we talked about enlightenment, we talked about simulation theory, physicists, things. So we have basically covered the next 700 years. Let's do one last round. What is it that you think? Let's forget about the next 700 years. Very, very concrete. What are the next steps for Bitcoin? What are you really looking at, guys?
700 years, that's high time preference, man.
That is low time preference.
No. What about 800
okay,
years?
I'm sorry.
Years.
You were trying to be funny. Giacomo.
For me, is especially putting together. So everybody feels cool when they discover something or design something fundamental, which is fine. It's obvious. So everybody wants to redesign the next layer to redesign the next fundamental scheme. But after one point, you have to bring all together. So Satoshi Nakamoto didn't invent hash algorithm or public key cryptography. He just put all the mature pieces together into something that worked. So right now, probably somebody, not me because I'm a shit poster, but somebody with some real skill should basically take things that people are studying and designing and work and put them together in a real way. Consider Bitcoin wallets. We don't want yet another Bitcoin wallet. There are plenty. But which Bitcoin wallet is really taking all the low-hanging fruits about privacy, about scalability, about the spectrum between trust and trustlessness, and put them together in an elegant design where you can just show a QR code and the two wallets will interact with the payment protocol and decide if they want to open a Lightning channel on the flight or if they just want to stay trusted for a small amount with a cashew mint and then they want to extend to a federation and then when to which level of amount they switch from one trust model to the other. So which wallet is really smart? I think this is something that nobody's yet tackling because we are still working on the fundamentals. That's fine. But eventually what I would like to see is moving from the design. It's like right now there's this meme, the Lightning Network is dead because I couldn't do I couldn't receive the payment. So yes, this mistake, we have to fix it. Yeah, but fixing it will take too long. So instead, let's just redesign something completely different from scratch. That doesn't make any sense. That's very satisfying psychologically. When you have to fix something, that's hard work. So instead, you come up with completely different design, and you have to rediscover the trade-offs from scratch. So now it's probably time to stop designing a little bit and trying to actually fix what works and put it together.
Dhruv, you want to?
Maybe I'll connect to my last statement. I think as a former physics person, I think something that bothered me a lot about Bitcoin was the energy usage. And I think a lot of people who are on the outside of this culture still worry about that. And this is not an issue about climate change or whatever that I'm really trying to get into. It's more just being wasteful is being wasteful, right? And you can't help but sometimes, if you don't know about Bitcoin, view that energy usage as fundamentally wasteful, and then you think Ethereum is the solution, or you think eliminating proof of work is the solution. Of course, I think most of us in this room know, or at least know now by the end of this conference, that that's not the solution. Bitcoin is deeply coupled to the world's energy infrastructure in very powerful, cool ways. But something I'm pushing on more and more in my thinking, and I think this is kind of the answer of stuff to work on right now, is I no longer like even using the locution that Bitcoin miners are creating Bitcoin with the energy that they use. I don't believe that statement. I don't believe Bitcoin is energy transmogrified into money. I think that's absolutely false. I think Bitcoin is sold for energy, and that doesn't make it energy. There's lots of things that are sold for energy that are not energy. Bitcoin uses a lot of energy because Bitcoin is extremely valuable, and the willingness of people to pay for Bitcoin in the currency of energy is extremely high. If Bitcoin were deemed to be less valuable, the system as a whole would use less energy because people will be unwilling to freely trade that energy for those coins that are being released into circulation as easily. And this framing is deeply important to me because I think the most important thing about Bitcoin is that it is decentralized. That's what makes it powerful, unique, and world-changing. And something that is decentralized, a synonym for that, is that it is market-driven. Right? Decentralized systems have to be markets because economic incentives are the only structures we have to drive cooperative behavior. There is no centralized entity to punish adversarial behavior or those who attempt to grief the network. And so good behavior must be concordant with economically profitable behavior. So the ability to make trades that make sense is what drives the system. So if Bitcoin is merely being exchanged for energy, that's a very different proposition for the environmentalists, for everybody else who might criticize that, than somehow Bitcoin uses an ever larger amount of energy to make ever fewer coins. That sounds crazy on the face of it. And this market framing, I think, is deeply important because if we're to grow Bitcoin, like beyond layer 1, to actually deliver transaction capabilities at layer 2, that layer must also inherently be a market. It can be nothing else. And so we really, as a group, need to start using this language more and more and more because it's not a technology problem, it's an economic incentive engineering problem. That's market dynamics. So let's start using this language, and that's something I think we can all be working on.
Yeah. Yeah, miners don't produce Bitcoins, they produce blocks. And they get paid in Bitcoins by Bitcoin users to produce blocks. And the energy is not wasted, it is sacrificed for greater good.
It's bought, sold, yeah.
Yeah, bought and sold. And I would say if I could do anything more for Bitcoin, like I would like people to explore the fact that Bitcoin is just information more. So that the 12 magic words are really magical. And also, what I can do personally is start trying to make Bitcoin Atlantis 2025 come into being. And we'll start by memeing, because memes are powerful.
I could not agree more, and even the sun is just coming out to see us out. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you all. It was a pleasure and an honor to host the last panel of 2024. Hopefully, we'll see you next year. Please give it up for the panel.